At the NFL Scouting Combine, Executive Vice President and General Manager Nick Caserio joins us. Nick, how's it going?
Fellas, always good to be here with you guys.
Well, great to be with you. Now, you've been here a long time, okay, with the Houston Texans, before that with another team. So how has what you do here changed or evolved over the years, Nick?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the schedule has been adjusted. I'd say the one thing, when I started the interview structure with the players, the quote-unquote formal interview process, it was the Wild West. So when I started, I was a runner. So literally in the old train station, as players are walking by, you're grabbing a player, bringing him into the room. It was chaos.
Right.
So when they normalized that and made it more structured, it was helpful to all the other teams. I remember there was a year we probably had literally 50 people, coaches, multiple players. I mean, it was chaos. And then you're kind of bartering with the other team. Hey, if I take this guy, we'll give you this guy, and then after 20 minutes we'll switch. So there was negotiating taking place. So the formal interview process is a lot more organized. So now they've spread it out a little bit over multiple days to try to help the players a little bit. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest changes over the course of multiple years.
Nick, one of the things D'Amico said yesterday, we're talking about the interview process, and it's the one thing that fans don't get a chance to see. They get to see the workouts and all that kind of stuff. But he talked about, and I asked him about the interview process, how much easier, not easier, but how much easier has it been doing this now year after year after year? This is the third year you guys have done it. He said, we're all sort of speaking the same language now. How important has that been to kind of do that, to speak the same language? You guys are all speaking Spanish, you're all speaking English, but you're all kind of speaking the same language together.
It's critically important. We understand what we're looking for from not only a skill standpoint on the field, but the type of human being that they are, that we want to bring in the building. So every player has a story, so we're learning their story, and we're trying to figure out, do they have the attributes that are necessary in order to have success in our building? So we think we have a decent idea of what that profile of the player looks like. So part of our responsibility is who are those players that have those characteristics, and be committed and disciplined enough to stay true to form, and just make sure that you're making decisions and you're not straying for whatever reason.
Sure. How much do you change up the questions for different players, and how much do you take into consideration, hey, this might be this guy's fifth interview, and he gets a little burnt out after a while, possibly?
For sure, which is why we try to make it sort of conversational. We're not trying to put the player in a position where he's going to be apprehensive about answering a question. If there's a kind of a hot-button issue, in a respectful way, you try to find a way to ask the question. You're trying to get information. You're trying to get a sense. You're trying to see how they respond to that. We'll have certain questions that we ask of every player. We'll have certain questions that are specific to that player. So our guys do a great job. I mean, John Richard, Zeke Curtis, Lip, who kind of handle some of the questioning and kind of kick it off. So we'll kind of start with a general template and then kind of drill down as we get going. And there might be something that comes up as a result of an answer to the question that the player provided.
Where'd you go to college, Ian? What's that? John
Carroll.
John Carroll.
Yes.
Hey, we have added a new offensive coordinator that went to John Carroll.
Coincidence.
Surprising development.
Coincidence. This is crazy. Tell us a little bit about Nick Caley from your perspective, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, he's an experienced coach. He's been coaching for a long period of time, even though he's sort of a younger coach. Has an extensive background in college, started on the defensive side of the ball, and then we hired him as kind of as a quality control offensive assistant in New England. And he went with the tight end / offensive line. So he learned a lot from Dante Scarnecchia in terms of run fundamentals, blocking techniques. And then he was able to oversee a position by himself there at some point, coaching the tight ends. And then his experience in New England combined with what he learned from Coach McVay, there'll probably be some things. He's going to build the Houston Texans offense, not an offense that was somewhere else. So that will be the focus. But great person, great husband. Nick and I stayed in contact, throughout the course of, his career. Have a lot of respect for him. He's got 4 girls. His wife just had a baby there the other day. So he's energetic. He's got a lot of juice and a lot of respects. He has some qualities that are similar to D'Amico. I'm not saying he's D'Amico Ryans. There's only one D'Amico Ryans, and thankfully he's our head coach. Yeah. So, but excited to have Nick here. We're just kind of going through the process of putting the playbook together and basic information, formations, defensive terminology, etc. So it's kind of hit the ground running here. So hopefully we can get off to a good start this spring.
As he builds the Houston Texans offense, how does that affect what kind of players you might draft on offense?
No, that's interesting, Mark. We'll get their feedback and kind of start with our team. How do you see the players we have currently? Are we okay with the player or looking for something different? When we're evaluating these players, what are some of the things that you see or we see, how they're going to fit into the offense? What's the role? So I think the role identification will be important. how the offensive coaches view it. Same thing on the defensive side of the ball. How does D'Amico view the player? How do our scouts view the player? Does it match up? Is there a little bit of a gap? All right, let's go figure out a way to kind of fill that gap. So ultimately, when the player comes into the building, we have a good plan and a vision for how we think we're going to deploy that particular player.
Okay, so we're coming up on the new league year. Legal tampering, although I know you called this illegal tampering.
There's
here at the
been
Combine.
some illegal tampering
Yeah,
going
there's
on,
a lot of stuff that goes on. And we talked about this, but I love this process of talking with you about the new league year and how the 2025 Texans end up getting built. And if you compare it to last year, which I know you don't look at it that way. Last year you had more cap space, all that kind of stuff. You had a vision of what you wanted to go out to do. As you look at this crop of free agents and starting that process, I know you probably already started it, but how do you kind of work that with what's going on here at the Combine this week?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at some point over the next few weeks, you're accumulating information. You're trying to get a sense of a player's market. Where's he going to fall? And then how do we see the role? And then trying to figure out, does the role match up with the value associated with it? Sometimes it'll be the case. And if that's a player that we can jump in on, then, you might have to compete for them. But to your point, we're focused on 25, so we're trying to put together the 25 Texans. This is the initial starting point, kind of the new league year. This will be an ongoing process, March, April, May, kind of take a break there in the summer, and then we come back in training camp. There'll probably be some things we do in training camp. So the team, how it looks today, there's a good chance it's probably going to look a little bit different from September, whenever the season opener is. But, I mean, it's a good opportunity here. You have agents. They kind of have a sense of we know who their players are, so you might be able to talk to an agent. He might have, 8 to 10 players. You're not going to be interested in all 8 to 10 players, but you're kind of trying to get a sense of, all right, what's the market? Where's the market? Where do you think he's going to situate? And then next week, and as you get closer to March 10th or whatever it is, you're trying to put yourself in a position so you can capitalize on an opportunity that can help your team.
Nick, hypothetically speaking, of course, as far as trade possibilities go, when you're in an environment like this where the other GMs are there and you can have face-to-face conversations, how different and or helpful is that versus – I don't want to text this to anybody or talk on the phone or whatever the case
texting
is.
Probably not, but you pick up the phone. But if you see a coach or a general manager, hey, would you be interested in so-and-so, or what are your thoughts there? It's a quick conversation. Honestly, it takes probably 2 to 3 minutes, and then, it's just more information. All right, what do you do with the information? It's not necessarily an actionable item, but it just kind of gives you a reference point. So I'm sure there's a lot of discussions going on. I think I've talked to a couple general managers with different teams. I mean, it's status quo. I mean, everybody's kind of doing the same thing. And you're just trying to figure out, what your options are relative to, whether it's the draft or what's going to be available in free agency.
With the Combine, and we talk about the interview process because we know that's pretty valuable and stuff that we can't see. Is there anything else, Nick, over the years that you looked at, you used to maybe emphasize this, maybe now you emphasize something a little bit different, years after you've been doing this. Is there anything like that for you where you've kind of, I didn't used to think this was as important, but now I look at this drill, this opportunity as being a little bit more important as we've gotten, on in football a few decades now?
It's a good question, Johnny. It kind of goes in cycles. I mean, every player is a little bit different. So, I mean, there's a lot of studies, and you can run some models, and there's some tools that might spit something out and kind of puts a player, maybe you weren't viewing him through that lens, but you run this and, hey, you know what? He stands out in this particular pressure rate or whatever it is. Okay, well, let's go back and take another look. So I think that's where the technology and the software that's available can kind of maybe enhance some of the things that you're doing along with some of the subjective things that you're doing and that you're seeing on film. So you're trying to kind of piece it all together and kind of fit it all together in the end.
So we talked about interviews here. How does that differ from a visit? I know it's a longer visit when they come to your place, but what kinds of things do you do during those visits?
Yeah, once you get them in the building, you just have more time. You can spend more time on film. You can spend more time on football. You can go through an installation. So 15 minutes, there's only so many things that you can cover. So 2 or 3 things, kind of get in and out, or you kind of have a reference point. And really, it's the opportunity for the coach to kind of get a touch point with the players. So our scouts do a phenomenal job. The college scouts do an incredible job of itemizing the background information, profile of the player, the character information from the school. When you get the player in the building, you just have more of an opportunity to kind of see, and then is the behavior going to be consistent from the start of the day to the end of the day? Does his behavior match up with what we thought it was going to be? So those are the things that you're looking for. Sometimes it's medically driven, Mark. So a player has a number of questions. You want your medical staff to get a more comprehensive look. So every situation is going to be a little bit different. It's all about just gathering information so that you can make a good decision on a player.
Nick, at the Senior Bowl, I know D'Amico was there with you, and you always joke with me about all the notes. So I got all the notes if you want to see them, by the way.
You got a lot of notes, I'm sure. Really good notes.
As you talk with D'Amico, how much do you want to share with him about players that you're watching and prospects that you're watching, and how much do you want him to kind of learn for himself that he wants to kind of like, I mean, you can give him the full download because you know these guys backwards and forwards, but how much do you want to kind of keep back? Like, I want him to figure this out too.
No, it's twofold. It's a give and take. So you're observing, you're watching a player. What do you see? And then he'd say, hey, what do you think of this player? Or what do you think about this? And I'll give him my opinion. You want to make sure, my perspective, that's an informed opinion. So that's why you just got to do the work, and you got to be able to provide a reference point. So we're going to talk about players. He and I will talk about players. We'll talk about players with Coach Cayley. We'll talk about players with Coach Ross. So we just want to make sure we're seeing the player through a similar lens. If there's a discrepancy, what's the discrepancy? Can we close the gap? For some reason we can't, then we'll just move on and pivot to the next player, because you want to make sure you have a unified vision. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to agree on anything, but you want to make sure that you have a unified vision for the role once a player comes into the building.
So painting the picture of the Combine, you walk through the halls here of the Convention Center, and there's kind of like a little trade show aspect to this as well. I see some equipment for sale and different things. Catapult is here. I know you guys use Catapult for the player health and safety and all that. So do you discover new things here tech-wise, Nick? Things on the market that you might not have thought of before?
You don't want it to confuse you. I mean, there's a few things. And, certain people's in certain areas, maybe your S&C, maybe there's something available. So we have other people from the organization that are out there. So I just try to stay in my lane and not get too involved in an area that I don't know anything about.
Nick, I want to make sure I ask this properly. How does the supposed strength, as you guys see it, at particular positions in the draft, somebody says, I don't know, the centers are tremendous in this draft. How much does that impact how you look at free agents and vice versa? Like, if it's a really good free agent class, one where you have a priority, but the draft is not very good, do those work together in some way? Do you analyze it like that, or it's separate things?
Yeah, it's separate, but it's related. So even, let's just say you're in free agency, so you're going to sign a player. All right, is it a 1-year deal? Is it a 2-year deal? So, if it's a 1-year deal, a year from now, that player potentially could not be here. When you get to the draft, you draft a player, you're probably going to have that player, assuming you make a good decision, you're going to have that player for 4 years. So there's room for both. So there's a little bit of, just because we do something here, it doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to do this. Because there's a short term, maybe the player maybe it's for a year from now. That's okay too. So it's an interesting perspective on it. You want to try to balance it off a little bit. Now, if you're making a long-term commitment to somebody, then Then, all right, if you're comparing two players, all right, you have a commitment here that you feel good about. All right, maybe you pivot and go to the other position. So that's kind of how you can you understand both markets, you understand what's available. But, again, even with the draft, you don't really know who's going to be available. I mean, you have no idea. So even if we want that player, he might be long gone. So that's why I trust your process, stack the board accordingly, put the grade on them. Here's what we think the role is, and then just take them off as we go, regardless of the position.
All right, reaching into the memory banks, I know this is just a small part of the whole evaluation process, but have there been workouts, maybe one or two over the years, that have really blown you away? Oh, my gosh, I was not expecting this out of this individual.
I'll give you two examples. So in whatever year Vince Wilfork came out, who was former Texan, 2003, I mean, it was him, I think DJ Williams. There was some other players. I mean, I remember being at that pro day, and Vince did things that a 300-pound player shouldn't be able to do. I mean, you're sitting there going, wait a minute. And I was 2 or 3 years into the league at that point. I didn't really know anything. I still don't know anything. But you watch this guy move and work out and go, holy cow, this was insane. And then Vince ended up falling. We didn't think he was going to be available. We didn't make the decision because of what I thought. But I remember seeing that workout going, this is this is rare. And then actually, I can't remember if it was the year before or the year after, but the year Bethel Johnson came out.
Oh, yeah, from A&M.
So they had him, Terrence Keel. They had offensive lineman. It might have been Billy Yates or whoever it was. But Bethel ran a 6'5" 3-cone drill or whatever it was. And it was it was on the indoor. They had the turf in there. He ran his time, and everybody was kind of looking at each other like, wait a minute, did I just see that? And he ran 4.28. And in the end, Bethel ended up being really more of a kickoff returner than a receiver. And that's at the time, you're like, am I seeing this right or am I missing something? So you're trying, and we had done a bunch of studies, and Josh McDaniels and I were doing this comprehensive project Bethel was a part of it, but those were a couple I was like, wow, like that's pretty incredible. And then you want to see, all right, is that going to carry over onto what they do on a football field? And that's in Vince's case, his agility, his balance, his body control, his athleticism. I mean, he did things that were rare for a defensive tackle.
Is that gauntlet drill helpful? Because it's cool to watch on TV.
Honestly, Mark, it's probably one of the better drills regardless of the position, because you see a lot of things. You see hand-eye coordination. You see their hands, how they actually catch the ball. They're running it through speed. They're running through the football. There's a certain pace that's associated with it. So on both sides of the ball, both for offensive and defensive players, it's actually a good drill and a good gauge as to how they handle the ball.
You do a lot of work when you get here. There's no question about that. But do you get when you mentioned Josh, that made me think about that. How many people you know here? Do you get a chance to kind of catch up a little bit, just have 2-minute conversation?
Yeah.
Hey, how's the family?
Yeah,
do you get a chance to do
here
that
and
here?
there. And honestly, what you're finding, Johnny, is like not all teams are sending their staffs. So you might not see some coaches here because we're going to do it a little bit differently. The days staggered a little bit differently. But, you see, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. And it's kind of, you sort of keep it moving. I mean, everybody's got stuff that they're doing. But it's always good to catch up. Maybe there's some other coaches that you've texted with and you get an opportunity to talk a little more football with.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, it's probably not as pronounced as you might think. But, it's an opportunity to do it. I mean, the whole league is sort of available, whether or not they're here or not. Like, that's a different case.
And to that end, man, I don't Indianapolis as the Combine host, because you can walk everywhere. Everybody's here. Do you like it as a site? Would you like it moved?
I would say selfishly, like I love everything about the Combine in Indianapolis. They've done a great job for a number of years. The infrastructure's in place. The logistics flow. I mean, the city has embraced it. I mean, Jeff Foster has done a great job. So, I mean, there's really no reason to change it other than, like, you just want to change it. So it's a great spot. You have accessibility. The medical, the convention center, the dome, like everything is accessible. So, I mean, not that it matters what I think, but, I think we'd be foolish to move the Combine just to move it.
All right, last one. I'm guessing as a player you didn't come to the Combine, Nick.
I was not invited. I worked out, actually. So I was not a very good player, but they had, like, the local kind of workout for the Northeast Ohio at Akron, University of Akron. So I think I ran a 40, ran pretty slow. I did the drills.
The rubber bowl?
And then the last thing I did, I'll never forget it, Chris Palmer was the head coach of the Cleveland Browns at the time. So that spring, I went and, like, did a workout after, like, one of their OTAs. So it was like I remember the day, it was sunny, it was a little bit of wind. I was nervous as hell. I'm throwing NFL receivers, and it was kind of like, all right, this is probably like my last go-around with this. Like, all right, I'm not going to play quarterback in the NFL. I'm going to go get into finance or business, whatever I was going to do, and now here we are.
Here we are. Nick, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks,
Have
guys.
a great week.
Appreciate you.